Yeah.
Good afternoon, Sue.
Hello, John. How are you?
Wonderful.
Good. Weather's good.
Here, yeah, it's beautiful. And looks like it's cool where you are.
60.
Is it? Yeah. That's not bad.
No. Occasionally in the morning we'll wake up and there'll be a little snow on the ground, but in general it's just fine.
Yeah. Let me ask you, when I used to go to Boston, one of my special treats was fried clams.
Oh yeah.
Does every corner place still have fried clams?
I don't know about every corner place, but you certainly can still find them.
I think that's what accounted for my high cholesterol at a very early age.
I don't think so, but okay. I don't think fried clams alone will do it.
No, but a lot of fried foods will.
Again, I'm not sure. I think to a certain extent, young. I don't know how young you were.
I
But
was in my 30s. I used to go up there a lot. You know where Wakefield is?
yeah.
Yeah, we had a plant in Wakefield, and I just loved. Once I got out of the airport and was able to make it around that roustabout or turnaround or whatever, they don't. I noticed they don't have that anymore.
Oh, but they have them in a few places, but not
Yeah,
many.
yeah, and if I could survive all that and make it up to Wakefield, I was happy camper.
Okay.
And I'd eat every day, lunch and dinner, fish.
Well, and I would do that today if I could.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the fish up there are great. There's so many good seafood kind of meals.
Yeah, where you live in the Midwest, you typically don't get, you have to be a meat and potatoes kind of a person.
Well, where we live in South Texas, we're close to the coast, so we get a lot of shrimp and oysters.
Oh, okay.
But we don't get the clams and all the seafood. And you had all the Portuguese up there in Wakefield. There was a large Portuguese population, all the good seafood meals and everything. Boy, I love that. Hi, Rachel.
Hello, Rachel. How's your husband doing?
good. Working. He's working nights right now, so
Oh,
Oh
boy.
dear.
yeah. They just I guess they just extended the contract for 3 more months, so looks like he's gonna be up there till August
It
around.
almost sounds like he's been drafted.
Yeah. Sorta.
Sort of,
They
kind
get to come home at all?
Yeah, but not, it's usually less than 2 days a week.
How far away is he?
It's about a 3 hour round trip.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Oh, you got a little puppy dog.
Yeah, she's wandering around. She keeps me company.
Yeah. So you tend to all of the grounds and everything yourself.
Yeah.
Do all the Paul Bunyan work and clearing the
Yeah.
brush and
Yeah.
moving those limbs that fall.
I was digging post holes today, fixing
Oh my
fences.
gosh, Rachel. Is
Yeah.
it Rocky?
Yeah. It's
Oh,
sincere work.
that's pure work.
Yeah.
How many post holes did you dig?
I did 3 today.
Oh boy.
Wow.
Yeah. I do a few and then I come in and take a rest.
Yeah, wow. Well, I'll tell you what, there's no way that I would go dig one post hole today in that rocky soil.
Yeah.
How about you, Fred?
I don't do post holes. I was cutting my grass today.
There you go. Yeah.
There you go.
How's the weather in Greenville?
It was in the 80s today.
Oh, wow.
Good.
We're getting an early summer.
Yeah, Paul told me you all have had some good weather.
Yeah, it's been really very warm, sunny. It's time to start planting stuff.
Yeah.
By the way, I like your rabbi's weekly notes. I
Oh,
told,
you mean her Shabbat message?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I told Paul to make sure and let her know that. I read those every.
Okay.
That's good.
Fred, I have a question.
Mhm.
When
Yeah.
when did kashrut become what one did?
hmm Well, the rules that we have now, it's kind of a mixture of two things. There's a set of rules in the Bible, in the Torah,
Right.
but then there's also a bunch of rules the rabbis made up later. They're really two components. The system that Orthodox Jews follow now really didn't come into use probably till about the Roman period, roughly maybe the first or second century, of this era. So you have a bunch of rules, like the basic rules that we're going to be reading in a couple of weeks, because they're in the book of Leviticus. You only eat animals that have a cleft hoof and are ruminants. You can only eat stuff out of the water that has fish and scale. You can't eat a whole list of birds, that they give you there, and no insects. So that's the basic rules. But then the rabbis made up a lot of stuff. Like for instance, uh, in Genesis, God tells Noah, you can eat meat now, but no blood. And so the rabbis invented this ritual of soaking and salting, in order to remove all the blood. There's the thing, there's a verse that appears 3 times in the Torah, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And the rabbis just kind of took that and ran with it and came up with this whole system of, 2 sets of dishes, no milk and meat together, that whole thing. And then there's the third rule, when Jacob is wrestling with this guy the night before, he going to meet his brother Esau, whether it's an angel or a man or whatever, and he wrenches his thigh. And so it says, Jacob limped on his thigh, and you can no longer eat the sinew of the thigh. Well, nobody has any idea really what the sinew of the thigh is. The Bible's not good on anatomy, but the rabbis decided it was the sciatic nerve. And so you have this elaborate thing where you have to, extract the sciatic nerve, from the hind quarter of an animal before it's kosher. And then there's really no basis for it in the Torah, but the rabbis decided that there's only one right way to slaughter an animal. You have to take a very sharp knife, draw it across the throat so that you slice the carotid arteries, if they think it's the quickest, least painful method of death. And there's no basis for that in the Torah. The Torah says nothing about how you slaughter the animal. And this is pure rabbinic invention. So the whole system, the Torah was there, but then most of the stuff the rabbis invented was during the Greco-Roman period. So by around the first or second century, the system we use now is pretty much in place.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
And
Okay. Well, I guess
my
everybody's
allergies are bothering
Fred?
me, so excuse me while I go get a tissue.
Fred,
sure.
the salting
Yeah.
process, that was a preservative also, right?
It may have been, there may have been other reasons for it. Yeah. But there also that was the invention of really led to the invention of what we call kosher salt.
Yeah.
The only reason, kosher salt can't be kosher or not kosher. It's a mineral, it's not a food.
Yeah.
But the reason it's called kosher salt is it's the salt that was used to make meat kosher. If you're salting a slab of meat and you take ordinary salt like we take out of a salt shaker, it vanishes into the meat. You really can't tell if you covered it completely or not. But kosher
Oh,
salt comes in these flakes.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
with kosher salt, it's much easier to really cover a piece of meat.
yeah.
And that really is why it was developed in the first place. But then later on, a lot of non-Jewish chefs decided they liked kosher salt because it was easier to work with the big
Hmm.
flakes and the tiny particles. So kosher salt is a big deal now in all kind of recipes that has nothing to do with religious law.
But it's just like around the Mediterranean, so much fish and stuff is all salted, and that's
Yeah,
because
they
that was
do.
a
Yeah,
preservative.
before refrigeration, everything was
Yeah,
salted. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The only downside of using only kosher salt, that ordinary salt has iodide, with the sodium chloride. It's fortified with iodine, whereas kosher salt doesn't. It doesn't have that added to it. And so, it's somewhat in areas where there's low iodine content and you're worried about goiter, thyroid problems
Oh,
is
that's what that's
endemic.
for?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, that's why salt was iodized. Yeah.
I'll be
Because in
darned.
area, there are a lot of areas where
Wait
there's a lot
till
of
Kennedy
iodide in the
comes
salt
after
or in
that.
drinking water.
Wait till Kennedy comes after that.
What?
Wait till Kennedy comes after
Yeah.
salting.
So uh, I didn't get that.
I said Kennedy is going to come after the salt. Just like he says no vaccines.
Your
Oh,
audio is breaking up. I couldn't
Oh,
really get
I'm sorry.
what you
Okay.
said.
Yeah, it looks like, let's see.
Oh, I think it's Fred.
Water. That's Kennedy's thing. Yeah. Um, yeah, we don't really add iodide to drinking water because most places in this country there's enough iodide, that you don't really worry about goiter. But there are parts of the world, where there really are no natural sources of iodine in the diet. And if you don't use something like iodized salt, there really can be problems with your thyroid. So that's why it was originally invented, really, just as a nutritional supplement.
mm.
But kosher salt doesn't have it. So anyway, the parsha actually for tonight is not in the regular sequence of parshas. Normally we would just read the next section of Leviticus since we're into that. But when there's a holiday, you sort of they suspend the normal system, and they usually have a special Shabbat a parsha that just reflects the holiday. And so this coming Shabbat, we're still in Passover. It will be the seventh day of Passover. And so rather than the regular Leviticus reading, we actually go back to Exodus, to read a Passover themed parsha. So this is really one that we read, I think, about a month or so, maybe more than a month ago. but this is what we'll be reading this Saturday, so it doesn't hurt to go over it again. It's actually Exodus chapter 13. And it really is going over the actual Exodus from Egypt.
You want me to start reading the,
Mhm. Yeah, the very first part is just really the first of three verses, 17 through 19. If you want to read that.
17 through 19? Okay.
Hmm.
When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea, and the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And
Yeah, that's far enough. Just
okay,
those three verses. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in those verses. When God let the people go, not by the way of a land of the Philistines. Of course, the land of the Philistines is Gaza, where Gaza would be on a modern map. And the Israelites, I wish I had a map of this. I tried to find a map I could scan in and maybe screen share, but I couldn't find a good map to scan. But I think you can visualize it. The Israelites are living in Goshen, which is in the Nile Delta in northwest Egypt. And the simplest way to get to Canaan, to get to where Israel is now, is just go up the Mediterranean coast. And so if you go up the Mediterranean coast, you enter Gaza from the south, and then you can spread out over the land of Israel. Um, the only problem with this is that the archaeologists are fairly certain that there were no Philistines in the Middle East at this time. We assume that the Exodus was sometime like around the 14th or 15th century BCE. And the Philistines didn't really arrive in the Middle East till around the 12th century. And so again, this was probably written by someone later on who wasn't really sure when the Philistines arrived in the Middle East. And he was probably writing centuries later at a time where there were Philistines in the Gaza area. And he was probably assuming that they were there at the time of the Exodus, even though they weren't. Although there were a series of Egyptian military forts up all through on the Mediterranean coast going up to Gaza. So it would have been a problem anyway if they decided to go straight up. And so what they did is take more of a roundabout route. They went toward the east and crossed into the Sinai Desert. Um, there also is a lot of controversy about the one of the words in there. There's a word called chamushim, which nobody really knows what it means. My translation says they went out armed. The one you read was equipped for battle. But that's just kind of a guess. That word chamushim doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible. So it's kind of a guess, what it is. And it's kind of unlikely they would have gone out armed. Where were they going to get arms from? Um, another guess is Hamushim sounds like Hamesh, which means five in Hebrew. Hamishim means 50. And so maybe they went up in troops of 50. That's another guess. But nobody's really quite sure what that word means. I don't really agree with the translation that says equipped for battle or armed, because it's kind of hard to imagine that. Um,
well,
Yeah.
during that time too, Egypt was a pretty big maritime state on the
mhm.
Mediterranean. They kind of dominated that part of the world, and they had all
Yeah.
those different ports. So I can understand why they would want to avoid that, because it certainly wasn't a perfect place, but they knew that that's something they wanted to avoid.
Yeah, because the sphere of Egyptian dominance really extended all the way up to Gaza, even
Yeah,
though the border of Egypt, where it was. Still, that they had military installations going up all the way up the Mediterranean coast into Gaza, so that it would have been a problem. So they
yeah,
swung over to the east, to cross the Sea of Reeds, which is basically the Sea of Reeds was really there was a chain of lakes where the Suez Canal is now. There were shallow lakes called the Bitter Lakes, and that's probably and they were really overgrown with reeds. And so that really is where the Sea of Reeds thing came from. They must have crossed one of those bitter lakes. Um, Though we really now, don't really know enough about to know how wide or how deep those lakes were. Whether it was more like a sea, really a huge lake with really deep, or just shallow lakes. We really don't know. Um, but the next step is verses is a longer reading, verse 20, going through 14:4, the fourth verse of chapter 14. Someone wants to read that.
They set out from Sukkot and encamped at Etham at the edge of the wilderness. The Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and a pillar of fire by night to give them light that they might travel day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before," I don't know how to pronounce that,
Yeah,
between Bagal and the sea.
Rio. Yeah,
Okay,
don't worry about it.
okay. You shall encamp facing it by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, "They are astray in the land, the wilderness is closed in on them." Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his hosts, and the Egyptians shall know that I am Lord.
Yeah, and they did so. Yeah, this is really kind of weird when you think about it, because the first part, the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud, this is something that followed them all the way, to the land of Israel, really. All the way through the desert, through those 40 years in the desert, they still had that pillar of fire and pillar of cloud. So that kind of became permanent in a sense. But these places, we don't really know where they are. These names, Haritot, Migdal, Baal-zephon, we really don't know where any of those places were. But actually what Moses is doing, rather than having them get out of there as soon as they can and cross the sea as quickly as or those lakes as quickly as he can, he's really using them for bait. He's telling them, just hang around over here because I'm gonna have Pharaoh come after you. He really is kind of using them as a decoy to draw Pharaoh's army after them, so that he can drown them in the sea. And again, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart, so I can show off what I can do, when I drown them all in the sea. And to me, this is
It was
kind of
very
piling
nice of
on.
God.
What?
That wasn't very nice of God.
It wasn't. And again, you figure, there already been these 10 plagues in Egypt, and which ended up with this 10th plague, where Pharaoh's own firstborn son, dies. Plus, who knows how many thousands of Egyptians have died. And you think, okay, this is enough. I mean, I think the Egyptians are impressed enough by the fact that you're God. Do you have to go this one step further? But he basically does. We were discussing this in another class I taught at Ollie, I think a few years back on this part of the Bible. And one of the guys said, that's typical shock and awe. That's what God was doing. And in a sense, it is. I mean, because he didn't have to do this. He could have simply, split the sea, let the Israelites go through. He
yeah.
didn't really have to inflict any more terror on the Egyptians. But I think basically he wanted to make this something that was so spectacular, that they would never forget it. And the Egyptians are kind of collateral damage in a sense from that.
I think that's probably, if you try to read through all of this, number one is what you said earlier, that they really weren't armed because they were released from slavery. So you take
Mhm.
a whole
Yeah,
cadre of people that were released from slavery. Now, how would they get all armed unless they had sticks and rocks? That was
exactly. Yeah.
probably the extent of it. So they were, they were very vulnerable. And what you're saying is, the Pharaoh, whatever heart, this whole thing played out, but because it is so spectacular, we're still talking about it today.
Yeah, well, I think he accomplished what he wanted to do. I
Yeah,
think we mentioned this before when we first time we read it. Of all the Jewish observances, by far the one that most Jews observe, even ones who don't observe anything else, is the Passover Seder.
yeah.
It really made an impression. So I guess he accomplished what he wanted to. Okay, and then the narrative picks up next with verse 5, and somebody want to read 5 through 9.
Sure. And it was told to the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart about the people, and they said, "What is this we have done, that we sent off Israel from our service?" And he harnessed his chariot and his troops he took with him, and he took 600 picked chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over it all. And the Lord toughened the hearts of the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites going out with a high hand. And the Egyptians pursued them and overtook them and camped by the sea. All the horses of Pharaoh's chariots and his riders and his force at Pi Hahiroth before Baal Zephon.
Yeah. So actually, all the Egyptians are on this, and this really it's hard to kind of justify this because just a chapter or so before this, after the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh is throwing them out of this country, saying, "Get out of here! I never want to see you again." Egyptians are pressing them to go, because who knows what's going to happen next if these people stay here. And all of a sudden, in the space of a couple of days, they do a 180. And now,
Yeah.
we should
Now
have
they're
kept
all
them.
leaving. We lost our labor.
Yeah. And now they're going after them again.
Yeah.
So now, Pharaoh's army catches up with them, camped, in front of the sea. And then the next part of the narrative, which is kind of interesting, is chapters 10 through 14. So we want to read that.
Fred, let me ask you a question before
Yeah.
this. Is if is this captured in the Egyptian history? And what's
Well,
their version of this history?
it's interesting. It's not. And that's led a lot of people to think a lot of this may be myth. Because, yeah, the Egyptians were pretty compulsive about recording stuff. You know,
Yes.
they, uh, they really were. And why would you not record something this major? One theory as well was a national humiliation. Maybe it's something they just wanted to forget. They didn't want it to carve into their records, how badly that they had been humiliated, by these Jewish slaves, who rose up. So you could argue it that way. There is only really one mention of Israel in Egyptian records. The archaeologists have found one stele, one column where one of the pharaohs said that I defeated Israel. So apparently there was some kind of Egyptian raid up into Israel. We can't date it exactly, but that's really the only acknowledgement that we have in Egyptian records of the existence of Israel. This whole narrative that we're reading doesn't appear anywhere in Egyptian records.
Oh.
So, and
Because
some
they
people
were
say, well,
pretty astute at recording all of this history.
they were, then some people have the theory, that this basically is mainly myth. This was something that was created later on as part of the national narrative.
Huh.
And then actually, verses 10 through 14 gives a reaction of Moses's people when they see Pharaoh's army. Somebody want to read 10 through 14?
I'll go ahead. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you will have only to be silent.
I mean, this to me is amazing. Now, these are the people that were there. They saw the 10 plagues. They celebrated the first Passover when God passed over their houses and the Egyptians were slain. And now all of a sudden, they want to go back. They've totally lost faith in God again. Moses had any sense, he would have resigned and retired right then. Little did he know there were 40 more years of this ahead of him. It's just
This is
amazing. I mean, these
this
guys
is
are
the
just out of Egypt 1 or 2 days,
yeah.
and they're already, it's a mistake. We want to go back.
It, this is a major milestone in the monotheism that Jewishness recognizes and is the pillar of everything that we stand for.
Hmm. Yeah, and this is really a generation that didn't have to have any faith at all. I mean,
Oh,
they had actually seen that they'd been there. They'd seen the 10 plagues. There was no need for any faith. That they saw with their own eyes, and
yeah,
they still didn't trust God after
yeah.
all that. Now, then, the first question this raises is why were these people chosen?
Why not
What
just let
what was
us
this?
hoe? Why
Yeah,
not just let us hoe the cotton for the
yeah.
Egyptians?
Yeah, and the usual, the usual rabbinic answer, of the rabbinic commentators is, well, God made the covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. They trusted in God. They deserved the covenant, and for their sake, God puts up with all this, for the sake of the covenant that he made with the patriarchs. Um, and basically, what Moses is saying is, okay. Um, God will fight for you. Just shut up. It was really is what that verse says. I don't want to hear any more of this.
Yeah,
And
Moses
then
wasn't given the option to resign and turn
no,
back.
it wasn't. Yeah. Okay. And then the actual, crossing the sea is verses 15 through 25. Someone wants to read that.
Sure. And the Lord said to Moses, Why do you cry out to me? Speak to the Israelites that they journey onward. As for you, raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and split it apart, that the Israelites may come into the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, look, I am about to toughen the heart of the Egyptians that they come after them, and I shall gain glory through Pharaoh and through all his force, through his chariots and through his riders. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, through his chariots, and through his riders. And the messenger of God that was going before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was the cloud and the dark, and it lit up the night, and they did not draw near each other all night. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord led the sea with a mighty east wind all night. And he made the sea dry ground, and the waters were split apart, and the Israelites came into the sea on dry land, the waters a wall to them on their right and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and came after them, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his riders into the sea. And it happened in the morning watch that the Lord looked out over the camp of Egypt in a pillar of fire and cloud, and he panicked the camp of Egypt. And he took off the wheels of their chariots and drove them heavily. And Egypt said, Let me flee before Israel, for the Lord does battle for them against Egypt.
Yeah. So, what's interesting is that, in the movie, Moses stretches his rod over the sea and it splits. But actually, what they describe here, there's a strong wind that blows all night. That it took that to get the sea finally split. But that wouldn't have worked for the movie. You had to have it happen, right away. You couldn't have it blowing all night. Although, if you assume this is a big shallow lake, a strong wind blowing all night might actually, blow away enough water, to create a path through it. And of course, to make sure that the Egyptians can't get out of it once they go in, he actually the Hebrew is that he hardened or he weighed down, their chariot wheel so they couldn't, quickly get back. And this would fit really with a muddy, lake bottom that iron chariot wheels would just sink into. You wouldn't be able to maneuver in there. Although again, though this says dry land, when in the narrative here, and of course there's a famous midrash on this, that when Moses first stretched his rod over the sea, nothing happened. Everybody's waiting, and the sea's not splitting, and the sea didn't split until one of the leaders of the tribe of Judah, a man named Nachshon ben Aminadab, jumped into the sea, and then the sea suddenly split. The idea was at least one Israelite had to show enough faith to do that. And then God went ahead and pulled off the miracle. And of course, Nachshon actually I think, grandfather or great grandfather of Boaz, who married Ruth, who became, he's a direct ancestor of King David, actually, with that. And actually, it made an impression because in 1948, during the Israeli War of Independence, one of the major operations that the Haganah launched, there was a Jewish community in the old city of Jerusalem, and it was completely surrounded by the Jordanian Legion, Arab Legion, and so they had to open an opening into the city, or else these people were going to be starved out. And the operation that the Haganah launched to open a path to Jerusalem, they called it Operation Nachshon. After this midrash about the story here. And then, because the rest of the story is verses 26 through 30. Someone wants to read that.
Sure, I'll go ahead. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen of all of the hosts of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained, but the people of Israel walked on dry land, on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on the right hand and on their left. Want me to read 30 also?
Yeah, through 31 actually.
Okay.
Finishes that part.
Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses.
Yeah, now they believe, although that's only temporary.
Yeah, just
It's
lasts
going
a
to wear
little
off
while.
fairly quickly. Yeah. But what follows here, chapter 15, is really the first major piece of poetry in the Bible. And depending which Bible you have, if you have a Bible with the Hebrew text, you can see that the lines are arranged differently. It's not ordinary prose. The lines are staggered, to indicate that this is a special section of the Bible. It's a special piece of poetry. And it's sort of a song of triumph that they sing on the other side of the sea after they've crossed it and Pharaoh's army is gone. I'll read it. It's actually when it's read in the synagogue, we'll be reading it this Saturday morning. It's actually customary for the congregation to rise and everyone stands, while this is being read. It starts with, then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spoke, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and the rider has he thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will glorify him. My Father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host has he thrown into the sea. His chosen captains are sunk in the sea of reeds. The deep covers them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Thy right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Lord, dashes in pieces the enemy. And in the greatness of thine excellency, thou overthrew them that rose up against thee. Thou sendest forth thy wrath, it consumes them like stubble. And with the blast of thy nostrils, the waters were piled up. The flood stood upright as a heap. The deeps were congealed in the heart of the sea. That is, bloweth thy wind, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is likened to thee, O Lord, among the mighty? Who is like unto thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? That you stretched out stretched out thy right hand, the earth swallowed them. Thou in thy love hast led the people that thou hast redeemed. Thou hast guided them in thy strength to thy holy habitation. The people have heard and they tremble. Pangs have taken hold on the inhabitants of Philistia. Then were the chiefs of Edom frightened. The mighty men of Moab, trembling, takes hold upon them. All the inhabitants of Canaan are melted away. Thou bringest them in and plantest them in the mountains of thine inheritance. The place, O Lord, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in, the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hands have established. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. And it's believed this was probably written much later and then inserted later in here. They talk about the place which thou hast made for thee to dwell in, the sanctuary which thy hands have established. This probably was written after the temple was built. The other clue is there are a number of Hebrew words in here that don't appear anywhere else in the early books of the Bible. We don't see them till much later in the Bible. And so it's kind of a clue that this was probably composed much later, but then inserted in here as a song of triumph. The other interesting thing is in verse 20, which says Miriam the prophetess. And this is the first time that a woman is identified in the Bible as a prophetess. Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand, and the women went out after her with timbrels and with dancing. And Miriam sang unto them, Sing unto ye to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and his rider has he thrown into the sea. And this is the first time in the Bible we have dancing as a sign of celebration. It was actually fairly common in ancient Hebrew culture. You remember there's a episode in the book of Samuel when the Philistines have taken the ark away in battle, and David goes back and recovers it, and the ark is brought back into Jerusalem, and David is running before the ark dancing. And there are a number of other episodes in the Bible where people dance, as a symbol of joy or of triumph. And apparently it died out later on during the Greco-Roman period. And it's kind of interesting that the one group of Jews that kind of revived that in the 18th century actually were the Hasidim. And if you've ever been to a Hasidic celebration of any kind, they always dance. It's always part of their celebrations. And they claim, that they're reviving the old biblical tradition of dancing that had been lost for a number of centuries after the biblical era. Of course, with them, men only dance with men and women only dance with women. It's not kind of dancing we would do, but it is dancing. Okay. And then the final part of it finishes off chapter 15. It's really it's really verses 22 through 27, if someone wants to read that.
And Moses
caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went on into the wilderness of Sur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. they came to Marah, but they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. That was why it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There he made for them a fixed rule, and there he put them to the test. He said, "If you will heed the Lord their God diligently, doing what is upright in his sight, giving ear to his commandments, and keeping all his laws, then it will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer." And he came to Elam, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there beside the water.
So it's just kind of, to me, it's kind of a nice contrast. You have this magnificent piece of poetry, this song of triumph at the sea. And then right after that, the whining starts again. We're thirsty, we're hungry. Are we there yet? And the whole narrative, it goes all the way through the book of Exodus, right through the whole Torah, really. It just makes you wonder why these people. Because there is a rabbinic tradition that actually the Jews were given the Torah because nobody else wanted it. Now the God offered it to every other nation in the world first, and they were the only ones you can unload it on. So they may not be much, but at least they did accept the Torah. So that was a starting point.
Yeah. The phraseology of what you read, Fred, sounds a lot like Psalms.
Yeah, it is. A lot of those verses, could have been taken out of the psalm, and a
Yeah.
lot of them are actually a part of the synagogue liturgy. Some of these verses we actually sing as part of the synagogue liturgy. Have been taken out of his poem. So,
Well, there's no question what this refers to is a miracle, and only God could do it.
yeah, yeah, and like one modern rabbi said, we really, as far as the archaeology is concerned, or there'll never be any evidence proving or disproving any
No.
of this. It's really a matter of religious faith. But
Yes.
even if you're a total skeptic, and you really don't believe any of this, you believe that this is all myth that was created later on. Still, it's an incredibly powerful myth. I mean, the fact that Jews still think this way. The Passover Haggadah that we read at the Seder says that every Jew has to feel as if he was personally there. We're
Hmm.
not reading about our great, 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 great ancestors being taken out of Egypt. We actually have to approach it as if we actually ourselves were there, being rescued from Egypt. And there really is a lot of resonance to that. As I said,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
the only Jewish observance which is close to being universal among Jews. Even Jews who are not connected to Judaism in any other way, that just has made this impression on them.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is this wasn't 20 or 30 people
Yeah.
that could have run through the dry land. This is
No.
thousands of
Yeah.
people.
Well, yeah, and again, the number that the Torah gives is kind of hard to believe. 603,000
Yeah.
men between 20 and 50. So you're talking about, somewhere north of 2 million people, which is, that's kind of hard to buy.
Yeah.
But again, a lot of writing in the ancient world is exaggerated. Not just the Bible. If you read about a lot of ancient battles, from what we know about the population of the world, a lot of them just basically couldn't have happened. Like for instance, and the Romans did that. One of the great Roman defeats was when Hannibal defeated the Romans at the Battle of Cannae. And according to the Roman historians, 55,000 Romans died in one day in that battle. And yeah, and you think about that. First of all, from what we know about the population of the world at that time, it's unlikely any nation had an army anywhere close to 5,000 people to begin with. And
Hmm.
then how do you kill 55,000 people in one day? You don't have automatic weapons or high explosives or the modern war. Every
One
one of
dull
these
knife.
55, right? Every one of these 55,000 people would have to be individually stabbed or
Yeah.
clubbed or hacked to death. And so again, it's probably a gross exaggeration, but it's really typical of all ancient writing, not just the Bible. And, one theory is it makes it sound more important if you pump up the numbers, essentially. So basically next week we'll get back to the normal cycle of Torah reading. So we'll pick up where we left off in Leviticus.
Okay.
We're going to pick up Leviticus.
Yeah, it will be, let me see where it is. Yeah, it's what we would have read this week if it weren't Passover. And it actually, let me see where it is here. Yeah, we're going to be on chapter 9 of Leviticus.
Chapter 9.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Does it
yeah,
start on the, does it
it
start
goes
on the
to,
8th day Moses called Aaron and his sons?
yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, it goes through chapters 9, 10, 11. And actually, it gives the dietary laws in this one.
Okay.
So that'll be an interesting discussion.
Good.
So we'll pick up there next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Goodbye,
good
all.
night.
Thank you, Fred.
Bye.